At 8:30 in the morning on June 6, 1944, Lieutenant General Omar Bradley stood on the bridge of the heavy cruiser USS Augusta, watching his invasion unfold, or what remained of it. Through binoculars streaked with salt spray, he could see Omaha Beach in chaos. Landing craft burned on the waterline, bodies floated in the surf, and soldiers who had made it to the sand lay pinned down by relentless German machine gun fire. Bradley had promised these men that naval bombardment would obliterate German defenses, and that they would face only demoralized, second-rate troops. Now, thousands were dead or dying, and the American commander of the ground forces was contemplating the unthinkable: evacuation. Pull the survivors off Omaha, redirect follow-up waves to Utah Beach or the British sector at Gold, and admit that the American assault had failed before it even began. What Bradley could not know from his position 8 miles offshore was that somewhere in that chaos, a 51-year-old general with a heart condition and a walking cane was about to change the course of the battle. The British had doubted the Americans from the beginning. Field Marshal Alan Brooke, chief of the Imperial General Staff, kept a diary throughout the war. In it, he recorded his private thoughts about strategy, Churchill, and the American allies whose entry into the war had saved Britain from near defeat. Brooke respected American industrial power. Factories in Detroit and Pittsburgh were producing tanks, aircraft, and ammunition at rates Germany could not match. But he had doubts about American soldiers. They lacked the combat experience that 2 years of North African, Sicilian, and Italian campaigns had given British troops. American generals, he believed, did not fully understand the German war machine they were about to face. This skepticism was not personal. It was institutional. The British had watched the French army collapse in 6 weeks during 1940. They had evacuated their own forces from Dunkirk under fire. They had lost Singapore, Greece, and countless other positions to enemies who moved faster and fought harder than expected. Caution had become doctrine. Americans, with their optimism and their soldiers who had never faced a Wehrmacht division in open battle, seemed dangerously naive. Prime Minister Winston Churchill shared these concerns. As late as February 1944, just 4 months before the invasion, he questioned the entire operation. He proposed alternatives: Norway, the Mediterranean, the Balkans, anywhere but a direct assault on the most heavily fortified coastline in the world. The British preferred attrition, allowing bombing campaigns, peripheral operations, and the Soviet Army on the Eastern Front to weaken Germany. Only then should the Allies risk a cross-channel invasion. Americans disagreed. General George Marshall, U.S. Army Chief of Staff, wanted a concentration of force at the decisive point. Hit the enemy where it hurt most, end the war quickly, stop the killing. This fundamental disagreement shaped every aspect of the invasion planning. In the end, it was Stalin who broke the deadlock. At the Tehran Conference in November 1943, the Soviet leader joined Roosevelt in demanding a firm date for the invasion. Churchill, outnumbered, reluctantly agreed. The date was set for May 1944, later pushed to June due to landing craft shortages. Even as the date approached, British doubts persisted. Would American troops perform under fire? Would American generals make sound decisions when plans collapsed? Would young men from Iowa, Texas, and California have the discipline and courage to take a fortified beach against veteran German defenders? June 6th would provide the answer. The relationship between British and American forces before D-Day was shaped by history and experience. British officers had been fighting since 1939. They endured the fall of France, the Blitz, Greece, Crete, and the long campaigns in North Africa. They had lost friends, colleagues, and entire divisions. They understood German professionalism and firepower. American officers, by contrast, had only entered the war in December 1941. Most had never heard a shot fired in anger until North Africa in late 1942. Even the veterans of Sicily and Italy were considered green by British standards. This experience gap created friction. British officers sometimes treated Americans as students needing instruction, while Americans resented the condescension. The alliance was real, but tensions were too. Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery embodied these contradictions. He respected Eisenhower, the American Supreme Commander, but also believed he understood ground warfare better. In his view, Americans had potential, but needed British guidance to realize it. Bradley, who commanded American ground forces under Montgomery, felt the strain. "Montgomery left me with the feeling that I was a poor country cousin whom he had to tolerate," he later wrote. Yet Montgomery also toured American training camps in England in 1944, speaking directly to troops. The soldiers responded with cheers. He recognized something essential. Americans were willing to fight, to cross an ocean, to liberate a continent they had never seen. The question was whether belief would be enough under fire. Planning for Omaha Beach assumed many things that turned out to be wrong. Army intelligence believed the beach was defended by a single regiment of the 716th Static Infantry Division, older men and foreign conscripts. The planners expected light resistance. They did not know that the 352nd Infantry Division, a younger, veteran unit transferred from the Eastern Front, had moved in. The plan also assumed that air and naval bombardment would devastate German defenses before troops touched sand. It did not happen. Cloud cover delayed the heavy bombers, causing bombs to fall on empty fields beyond the beach. Naval bombardment lasted only 40 minutes, far short of what was needed. The landing plan called for 32 amphibious Sherman tanks to arrive with a first wave to provide mobile artillery support. But the 5-foot swells and strong currents of the English Channel sank 27 of the 29 tanks launched in the eastern sector. Men of the 1st and 29th Infantry Divisions arrived at Omaha without armor, without air cover, and facing an enemy far stronger than anyone had predicted. The killing began immediately. German machine gunners had registered their weapons on the waterline. Men exiting the landing craft jumped into chest-deep water or onto open sand, and many never reached cover. Company A of the 116th Infantry Regiment, 29th Division, landed directly in front of a German strongpoint. Within 10 minutes, the company suffered 96% casualties. Fewer than 20 of more than 200 men reached the seawall alive. The survivors found themselves trapped, the tide rising behind them, the slope of sand ahead, steel obstacles, and steep bluffs crowned with bunkers. Every inch of ground was covered by interlocking fields of fire. Men huddled and prayed, while medics could not reach the wounded. By 8:30 a.m., 6 hours after the landing began, the troops held only 10 yards of beach, far short of the planned mile inland. Amid this chaos, Brigadier General Norman Cota landed at 7:30 a.m., one of the highest-ranking officers to go ashore that day. He had opposed the daylight landing from the start, advocating a pre-dawn assault to achieve tactical surprise. Overruled, he prepared his men for the reality of the beach. Moving upright while others crawled, Cota strode across the sand, rallying soldiers. While Omaha Beach burned under machine gun fire 15 miles to the west, a different story unfolded at Utah Beach. Here, Brigadier General Theodore Roosevelt Jr., the oldest general to land with the first wave, demonstrated leadership that would save hundreds of lives. At 56, walking with a cane and hiding a heart condition from Army doctors, Roosevelt requested 3 times to land with the assault troops. Twice he was denied. The third request, finally approved in writing by Major General Raymond Barton, emphasized a simple truth. Soldiers fight better when their commanders share their danger. The first wave at Utah Beach was carried off course by strong currents. Landing craft came ashore nearly 2,000 yards south of their intended target. Many officers would have attempted to move troops to the original landing zone under fire, risking massive casualties. Roosevelt, however, assessed the situation calmly. He announced, "We will start the war from right here." With his cane in hand, he personally reconnoitered the beach, identifying routes inland and directing troops to advance. His presence steadied soldiers, giving them the courage to move under fire. That morning, Roosevelt and his son, Captain Quinton Roosevelt II, landed on Utah Beach together, the only father and son pair to storm the beaches on D-Day. Roosevelt's actions earned him the Medal of Honor, awarded posthumously, though he never lived to learn of it, dying 5 weeks later in Normandy. Back at Omaha Beach, the struggle continued. Units that had survived the initial landings faced another cruel reality. The invasion plan was shattered. Company commanders were dead or wounded, communications were broken, and soldiers had to improvise to survive. The only way forward was through leadership, often by the lowest-ranking men willing to take initiative. Small groups began moving inland, following officers like Cota and other sergeants who refused to accept that defeat was inevitable. Colonel George Taylor of the 16th Infantry Regiment famously told his men, "There are two kinds of people who are staying on this beach, those who are dead and those who are going to die. Now, let us get the hell out of here." That blunt command captured the reality of Omaha. Survival depended on action. With courage and determination, small groups started breaching wire obstacles using Bangalore torpedoes. For every man killed, another took his place. Slowly, the beach began to transform from a killing field into a fragile beachhead. The U.S. Navy played a decisive role. Destroyers, which had pulled back after the initial bombardment, returned, closing to within 800 yards of the shore to fire on German positions. This was dangerously close to running aground, but the captains did not hesitate. Naval gunfire suppressed bunkers and machine gun nests that had survived the earlier bombardment. Colonel Stanhope Mason, Chief of Staff of the 1st Infantry Division, later credited the Navy with making survival possible. Without the gunfire, he said, we positively could not have crossed the beaches. But gunfire alone did not clear Omaha. Men did. The German defenders, elite troops of the 352nd Infantry Division, were stunned by American persistence. Machine gunners, such as Heinrich Sevel, fired thousands of rounds from fortified positions overlooking the beach, expecting to break the assault within the first hour. They could not anticipate the American willingness to absorb punishment and continue moving forward. Individual initiative replaced the broken chain of command, a phenomenon that left both the German defenders and British observers in disbelief. The Americans fought not with precision, but with determination, and it worked. British commanders, including Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, observed these events with mixed feelings. The British strategy emphasized methodical, combined arms operations. Infantry advanced with artillery support, tanks, and air cover. The Americans, particularly the National Guard units like the 29th Infantry Division, relied on improvisation. They lacked combat experience but possessed raw courage. Their method may have seemed chaotic, but it was effective. British officers such as Field Marshal Brooke took note, recording both admiration and concern in their diaries. Americans could fight. They could lead. But their methods were unconventional. The 29th Infantry Division, nicknamed the Blue and Gray, embodied these contrasts. Men from Maryland and Virginia, descendants of opposing sides in the American Civil War, fought side by side. Most were clerks, farmers, and factory workers who had trained extensively but had never faced combat. Their practice landings at Slapton Sands in England had not prepared them for Omaha. Yet, when faced with extreme adversity, they acted with initiative and determination. Veteran units, such as the 1st Infantry Division, provided some leadership, but German fire killed many experienced officers. The result was a grassroots, soldier-led advance that overcame almost impossible odds. At the same time, Montgomery's British forces pressed their objectives at Gold, Juno, and Sword Beaches. Gold Beach, assigned to the British 50th Division, advanced according to established doctrine. Infantry worked with tanks and artillery, supported by air cover. Progress was steady, but met with German artillery and mortars. At Sword Beach, the British 3rd Infantry Division attempted to capture Cannes, the largest city in the invasion zone. Their initial objectives were not achieved. Cannes would not fall until a month later. German counterattacks threatened to split British beachheads, but glider reinforcements stabilized the line. The contrast between British methodical advances and American improvisation on Omaha and Utah was clear. In both cases, individual leadership proved decisive. At Omaha, it was General Cota and other officers and NCOs who led men into fire, breaking through wire and scaling bluffs. At Utah, it was General Roosevelt who turned an off-course landing into a strategic advantage. Both men understood that courage and presence mattered more than perfect adherence to plans. Their actions not only saved lives, but ensured that the Allies established beachheads critical for the success of Operation Overlord. The psychological impact of D-Day on both sides was significant. German commanders had assumed that inflicting massive casualties would halt the assault. Instead, they watched Americans continue to advance despite losses. Morale among German troops declined as their defenses crumbled, while Allied confidence grew. For the British, the day forced a recalibration of their assumptions. Americans were not novices. They were capable, aggressive, and adaptive. The skepticism that had shaped British planning in 1943 remained, but it was tempered by respect for the results. By evening, Omaha Beach had been secured at terrible cost, while Utah Beach had achieved its objectives. The courage of men like Cota and Roosevelt, the improvisation of ordinary soldiers, and the support of naval forces had transformed potential disaster into strategic success. These actions laid the foundation for the breakout from Normandy in the coming weeks, and ultimately contributed to the liberation of Western Europe. D-Day demonstrated that war is not won solely through doctrine or planning. It is won by men willing to act when plans fail, by leaders who lead from the front, and by soldiers who refuse to give in to despair. The lessons of Omaha and Utah would echo throughout the Normandy campaign, shaping not only tactics, but the alliance. While the Allies struggled to secure Omaha and Utah beaches, the German defenders faced their own crisis. The 352nd Infantry Division at Omaha and the 716th Static Division at Utah had prepared extensively for an amphibious assault, but they could not anticipate the sheer persistence and adaptability of the American soldiers. Machine gunners like Heinrich Sevel had been trained to hold the beach at all costs, and they fired thousands of rounds at advancing troops. Yet the Americans kept coming. Even as units were destroyed, replacements appeared. Where doctrine would have dictated a collapse, the defenders saw a relentless human tide. German officers expected that massive casualties would force the Americans to retreat. This was standard military logic. Every army has a breaking point. Yet that breaking point never came. Individual Americans acted on instinct and courage, improvising where the chain of command had failed. Leadership emerged at all levels, officers and COs, and even privates who seized initiative to move forward. The Americans did not fight as a single coordinated unit following the plan. They fought as groups of determined men refusing to die in place. This unconventional approach left German troops bewildered. Omaha Beach, in particular, became a crucible of improvisation and leadership. Brigadier General Norman Cota exemplified the kind of command that could change the outcome of a battle. Landing an hour after the first wave, Cota ignored the chaos and death around him. He walked upright, moving from group to group, rallying men to advance. At one point, encountering pinned-down soldiers of the 5th Ranger Battalion, he shouted, "Well, goddammit, then Rangers lead the way." Those words would later become the official motto of the U.S. Army Rangers, a symbol of courage and initiative in the face of impossible odds. Colonel George Taylor of the 16th Infantry Regiment echoed a similar sentiment with his blunt instruction. "There are two kinds of people who are staying on this beach, those who are dead and those who are going to die. Now, let us get the hell out of here." Moments like this illustrate the gap between planning and reality. Doctrines and bombardments could not clear Omaha Beach. The survival and success of the invasion depended on men willing to act decisively under fire. The American experience at Omaha contrasted sharply with the British approach at Gold and Sword Beaches. British troops, veterans of campaigns in North Africa, Sicily, and Italy, advanced methodically. Infantry worked alongside tanks and artillery, supported by air cover, following established doctrine. Casualties were still high, but progress was steady and coordinated. The Americans, particularly the inexperienced National Guard units of the 29th Infantry Division, relied on courage and improvisation. Their success proved that rigid adherence to plans was not the only path to victory. At Utah Beach, Brigadier General Theodore Roosevelt Jr. faced a different set of challenges. landing off course due to strong currents. His first wave came ashore nearly 2,000 yards south of the intended target. Rather than attempting a dangerous move to the original landing zone, Roosevelt assessed the terrain and ordered troops to advance from their actual position. Walking calmly under enemy fire with his cane, he identified routes inland and guided soldiers to new objectives. His leadership ensured that troops moved efficiently, minimized casualties, and maintained the initiative. This personal example reinforced a principle that would define the American approach to Normandy. Presence, courage, and adaptability matter as much as training and planning. The combination of individual initiative and adaptive leadership gradually broke the German defenses. Omaha Beach, initially a death trap, became a foothold for further operations. German officers, observing the Americans' willingness to absorb punishment and continue attacking, realized that the enemy was not behaving according to expected norms. The psychological impact was profound. German soldiers, despite being well-trained and well-positioned, began to doubt whether they could hold their positions. By evening, the 352nd Infantry Division had lost about 20% of its strength, and many of its bunkers and strong points were neutralized. The Allied success at the beaches had immediate strategic implications. Securing Omaha and Utah allowed reinforcements and supplies to flow inland. By the end of D-Day, the Allies had established a tenuous but real beachhead in Normandy. Over the coming weeks, American forces would expand their positions, link with British and Canadian units, and prepare for a larger breakout. Operation Overlord had succeeded, but at a cost that shocked even the most seasoned officers. Thousands of American soldiers had died, yet the beaches had been held and the invasion continued. The interplay of American improvisation and British methodical planning became evident in the following days. British forces continued to advance with doctrine-driven operations, focusing on objectives like Cannes, Gold, and Sword Beaches. American forces, learning quickly from the chaos at Omaha and Utah, adapted their tactics. Small unit leadership, coordinated assaults using available armored support, and the willingness to take calculated risks allowed them to overcome unexpected German defenses. This adaptability would define the American approach throughout the Normandy campaign and beyond. The German perspective highlighted the intensity of the assault. Defenders watched as wave after wave of Americans landed, often in the wrong place, often with officers and NCOs killed or wounded. They saw men climb over obstacles, wade through mines, and cross open ground under direct fire. Casualty reports alone could not capture the psychological toll of this persistence. German soldiers, conditioned to expect retreat after inflicting massive losses, were confronted by an enemy that refused to stop. Morale among the defenders faltered, and command decisions became reactive rather than proactive. Omaha Beach, designed as a killing zone, was slowly slipping out of German control. The lessons of D-Day extended beyond the immediate tactical and strategic implications. The Allies had learned that victory depended not only on planning and resources, but also on leadership, adaptability, and the determination of individual soldiers. British skepticism of American troops, rooted in experience and caution, was tempered by admiration for their tenacity and ingenuity. The American ability to fight under impossible conditions reshaped perceptions of their competence and forged a stronger alliance. In the weeks following D-Day, American forces leveraged the beachheads to expand inland, ultimately linking with British and Canadian units. Operations like Cobra, launched in late July, capitalized on the foothold established on June 6, allowing the Americans to break out of Normandy and advance across France. Paris was liberated by August 1944, and by the spring of 1945, American troops were crossing the Rhine into Germany. The sacrifices and improvisation at Omaha and Utah had laid the foundation for the liberation of Western Europe. Leadership lessons from D-Day endure. Norman Cota and Theodore Roosevelt Jr. demonstrated that courage and initiative can turn the tide in moments of extreme adversity. Soldiers who had trained in exercises at Slapton Sands or in American States National Guard units were tested in real combat and rose to the challenge. Their actions proved that even inexperienced troops. After June 6, 1944, the Allies faced a new challenge, consolidating their tenuous beachheads and pushing inland through the Normandy countryside. The initial landings had succeeded, but the war in France was far from over. The bocage, the dense hedgerows that crisscrossed the Normandy farmland, turned the terrain into a natural fortress for the German defenders. For the Americans, the open chaos of Omaha Beach was replaced by a slow, grinding war of attrition in fields and villages, where visibility was limited and every hedge line could conceal enemy fire. American planners had underestimated the difficulty of the bocage. Tanks and armored vehicles, which had been so effective on the beaches, struggled to navigate the thick hedgerows. Infantrymen faced constant ambushes as German snipers, machine gunners, and artillery observers used the terrain to devastating effect. The hedgerows turned what should have been a rapid advance into weeks of slow, exhausting combat. Yet the determination of the American troops, tested at Omaha and Utah, remained unbroken. Small units improvised tactics. Engineers used explosives to blast gaps through the hedgerows. Squads flanked positions whenever possible. And leaders at all levels adapted plans on the spot. Norman Cota's experience at Omaha Beach proved invaluable during this stage. Cota, now commanding the 28th Infantry Division, emphasized decentralized leadership and individual initiative. Soldiers who had learned to follow their leaders under fire now became leaders themselves, directing assaults, organizing defenses, and coordinating with artillery support. Brigadier General Theodore Roosevelt Jr.'s example at Utah Beach also influenced American doctrine. Frontline commanders realized that presence, courage, and decisiveness could make the difference between survival and annihilation. The Germans, meanwhile, were determined to contain the Allied breakout. Experienced units, including remnants of the 352nd Infantry Division and armored formations from the Panzer Divisions, conducted counterattacks whenever opportunities arose. These counterattacks often inflicted heavy casualties, but they also revealed the limits of German reserves. Every failed assault depleted manpower and ammunition, further weakening the ability to defend the Normandy coast. German commanders increasingly recognized that holding the Allies at bay indefinitely was impossible. American forces quickly adapted to the terrain. Engineers developed specialized vehicles, such as the Rhino tanks equipped with hedgerow-cutting devices, to breach German defenses. Infantry learned to coordinate more closely with artillery, using creeping barrages to suppress enemy positions. The combination of flexibility, leadership by example, and sheer persistence allowed the Americans to slowly expand the beachheads. Each small victory, securing a village, eliminating a sniper nest, or breaching a hedgerow, built momentum for the larger breakout. British and Canadian forces continued to play a critical role in the overall operation. At Gold, Juno, and Sword Beaches, advances were steady, though not without cost. British artillery and armor worked in close coordination with infantry, demonstrating the value of methodical doctrine. Meanwhile, deception operations, such as Operation Fortitude, had successfully convinced the Germans that the main invasion would occur at Calais, keeping reserves away from Normandy. The combination of American aggression and British methodical planning allowed the Allies to maintain pressure across multiple sectors, stretching German defenses thin. The first major breakout came in late July with Operation Cobra. American forces, reinforced and reorganized after weeks of brutal fighting in the bocage, launched a concentrated attack near St. Lo. Heavy bombing from B-17 and B-24 bombers softened German positions, while infantry and armor advanced behind the barrage. The result was a rapid penetration of the German lines, creating a corridor for mechanized forces to exploit. The breakout demonstrated how the lessons of D-Day, leadership under fire, improvisation, and adaptation to terrain, had matured into operational effectiveness. German forces, caught off guard by the speed and ferocity of the American advance, struggled to mount effective counterattacks. Tank units were committed piecemeal, artillery was often out of range or poorly coordinated, and command structures were disrupted by continuous pressure. The bocage, once a defensive advantage, became less effective as American units gained experience and developed new tactics. By early August, the Allies had expanded their territory significantly, linking the beachheads with inland positions and surrounding key German garrisons. The human cost remained high. Casualties continued to mount on both sides, with soldiers facing fatigue, disease, and constant threat from snipers and artillery. Yet the determination forged on Omaha and Utah endured. Soldiers who had faced death in the surf were now seasoned veterans, able to operate with initiative and confidence. Small units became self-reliant, coordinating movements, setting ambushes, and exploiting weaknesses in German lines. The psychological edge shifted further to the Allies, as the Germans realized that no single defensive position could halt the American advance. The Normandy campaign also highlighted the growing cooperation between Allied nations. While British forces provided expertise in artillery, armor coordination, and logistics, American forces brought industrial power, manpower, and an aggressive approach to combat. Commanders learned from each other. American generals observed British discipline and organization, while British officers noted the effectiveness of decentralized initiative and audacity. The synergy between the two armies, tempered by mutual respect earned during the beach's bloodiest hours, became a decisive factor in subsequent operations. By August 25, 1944, the Allies liberated Paris. The Normandy campaign, which had begun with the chaos of Omaha and Utah, had transformed into a coordinated, multifaceted offensive. The combination of American resilience and British methodology proved that the alliance could not only survive the stress of combat, but could thrive under it. Lessons learned in the bocage and along the beaches would influence Allied strategy for the remainder of the war, reinforcing the importance of leadership, adaptability, and cooperation in modern warfare. The Normandy campaign also reshaped perceptions among soldiers and commanders alike. American troops gained confidence in their abilities, proving that citizen soldiers could perform as effectively as career military men. British officers recognized that American methods, though unorthodox, could achieve results where rigid doctrine might fail. The Allies had learned to respect each other's strengths, integrating them into a unified effort that would carry across France, into Belgium, and ultimately into Germany itself. The strategic implications extended beyond Normandy. The successful breakout allowed Allied forces to advance rapidly through Western Europe, forcing German armies into retreat and eventually collapse. Supply lines were secured, armored units could exploit open terrain, and morale among both Allied troops and liberated population soared. Omaha Beach and Utah Beach were no longer isolated victories. They had become the foundation for the liberation of France and the eventual defeat of Nazi Germany. Norman Cota and Theodore Roosevelt Jr. By late August 1944, the Allies had achieved what once seemed impossible. The beaches of Normandy, secured at a terrible cost, had become a launching point for the liberation of France. American and British forces had fought their way through the hedgerows, captured key towns, and linked their sectors to form a continuous front. The breakout from Normandy, exemplified by Operations Cobra and Totalize, demonstrated the transformation of raw courage into operational effectiveness. Soldiers who had survived Omaha Beach now led battalions and companies, applying the lessons learned under fire. The German forces, meanwhile, were in retreat. The loss of Normandy shattered the cohesion of the Wehrmacht in Western Europe. Armored units and infantry were forced to fall back, often piecemeal, leaving critical positions undefended. The destruction of the Falaise Pocket in late August trapped tens of thousands of German soldiers, forcing surrender or annihilation. The Allies had gained more than just territory. They had broken the backbone of German resistance in France. The strategic momentum was now firmly in their hands. American leadership played a pivotal role in this success. General Omar Bradley, who had nearly ordered evacuation on D-Day, now commanded the largest American field force in history. His decisions, grounded in experience from Omaha and subsequent campaigns, ensured that the advance remained coordinated even across a front hundreds of miles wide. Bradley's emphasis on supporting small unit initiative, combined with superior logistics and overwhelming air support, allowed the Allies to maintain relentless pressure. American divisions, once criticized as inexperienced, were now seasoned combat forces capable of independent action. The British and Canadians continued to provide critical support. While American forces pushed through the bocage and across open country, British armor and infantry maintained pressure in the northern sectors. Operations by the 21st Army Group, commanded by Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, ensured that German forces could not regroup to counterattack effectively. The Allies had achieved a balance of methods. British methodical planning, combined arms coordination, and American audacity and improvisation. Together, they created a war machine that could exploit both surprise and strength. One of the most critical aspects of the campaign was logistics. The Allies had anticipated the difficulties of supplying forces across the Normandy beachheads, and meticulous planning ensured that food, ammunition, and fuel reached the front lines. Mulberry harbors, portable piers off Omaha and Gold beaches, allowed continuous unloading of supplies, while the Red Ball Express, a massive trucking operation, kept advancing units equipped for combat. Without this support, the rapid advances that followed D-Day would have been impossible. Logistics became a decisive weapon, complementing bravery on the front lines. As the Allies advanced, German resistance grew increasingly desperate. Panzer divisions attempted counterattacks, and fortified towns became deadly gauntlets. Villages like St. Lo and turned into urban battlegrounds, with street-to-street fighting reminiscent of earlier campaigns in Sicily and Italy. Yet American forces, drawing on lessons from Omaha Beach, adapted their tactics. Infantry coordinated with artillery and armor, engineers cleared obstacles efficiently, and leadership at every level encouraged initiative. Even units cut off from command found ways to fight effectively, a testament to the training and resilience forged in the fires of D-Day. Individual acts of heroism continued to define the campaign. Soldiers like Brigadier General Theodore Roosevelt Jr., who had led troops at Utah Beach, and Norman Cota, whose leadership had saved Omaha Beach, became symbols of courage and initiative. Their example spread through the ranks. Small unit leaders inspired men to fight beyond exhaustion, to continue attacking despite casualties, and to innovate when plans failed. By combining courage with adaptability, the Allies maintained momentum where rigid doctrine might have stalled. The liberation of Paris on August 25th was both symbolic and strategic. American and French forces entered the city after weeks of rapid maneuvering, and the German occupiers had no capacity to resist effectively. The event showcased the speed and reach of the Allied advance and lifted morale across Europe and the Allied nations. From the beaches of Normandy to the streets of Paris, the transformation of inexperienced soldiers into effective combat units was evident. The once green troops of Omaha Beach were now veterans, tested in every terrain, under every form of fire, and proven in every aspect of modern warfare. The following months saw the Allies advance across Belgium and into the Netherlands. The Americans, taking the lead in many sectors, demonstrated operational flexibility and willingness to accept risk to exploit German weaknesses. The British, Canadian, and other Commonwealth forces supported and reinforced advances, securing flanks and maintaining pressure on German defenses. Coordination across multinational armies had improved markedly since D-Day, and lessons learned in Normandy continued to influence planning. Communication, reconnaissance, and combined arms tactics became increasingly sophisticated, allowing rapid advances without repeating past mistakes. Crossing the Rhine in early 1945 marked the final phase of the Allied push into Germany. The river, heavily defended and heavily fortified, had been considered a formidable barrier. Yet the experience gained from amphibious operations, hedgerow fighting, and urban assaults allowed American forces to conduct successful crossings. Leadership, initiative, and meticulous planning converged to overcome natural and man-made obstacles. From Omaha Beach to the Rhine, the transformation of the Allied armies was complete. By spring 1945, American forces were advancing deep into Germany. German resistance, exhausted and depleted, could not prevent defeat. Cities fell, industrial capacity was destroyed, and the remaining German army was unable to mount an effective defense. The courage and determination displayed on the beaches of Normandy had scaled into a strategic advantage that shaped the end of the war in Europe. What began as a perilous gamble on June 6th had evolved into a successful campaign that liberated an entire continent. The legacy of D-Day extended beyond battlefield victories. The alliance between Britain and America, tested under fire and cemented by mutual respect, provided the foundation for post-war cooperation. Military doctrines evolved, honoring lessons learned from improvisation, initiative, and adaptability. Individual acts of heroism, from Norman Cota and Theodore Roosevelt Jr. to thousands of unnamed soldiers, were remembered in cemeteries, memorials, and historical accounts. These acts not only shaped the outcome of the war, but also set standards for leadership and courage in modern military history. In reflecting on the campaign, historians note the interplay between planning and improvisation. The British emphasis on preparation and coordination ensured stability and reliability. The American willingness to adapt, to push forward despite chaos and losses, provided dynamism and resilience. Together, these complementary approaches created a force capable of overcoming any obstacle. The Normandy campaign and the subsequent liberation of Europe